Excellent. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming along to this. I think this is the third time we've done a Moving Communities community survey webinar. We're going to take about an hour, 60 minutes to cover quite a lot of topics. Today, we're going to be doing some real drill downs. There's going to be the opportunity to ask questions via the chat. Jack Shakespeare is joining us from Moving Communities. He'll be managing those Q&As that hopefully come in the chat. As I say, I think housekeeping wise, just make sure everyone is aware that we're going to be recording this so we can distribute to people that couldn't make it today. If you want to make any comments at all or ask a question, please use the chat function. We're not going to be taking sort of hands up and video questions today. And if you can keep yourself muted at all times, that would be brilliant. I think there may be one person on who is unmuted. I'm getting a little bit of background noise, so if you can check, that's fantastic. That's excellent. Okay, brilliant. I think that's the housekeeping done. So let me crack on and just explain the agenda we're going to do over the next 60 minutes. First of all, my name's Mike Hill. I'm a director of Active Insight, formerly known as LeisureNet Solutions, and we're the lead partner on the surveying elements of Moving Communities. So the two surveys that I'm referring to are the community survey, which we're going to be talking about today, and the customer experience survey, which I'm sure a lot of you are aware of. We've been running for the last 4 or 5 years on a regular basis. But it's the community survey we're going to be covering off today. We've got new benchmarks. We've had quite a few new, more local authorities doing it. The sample size has gone up considerably, so it seemed a good time to share some of those insights with you guys. I'm going to hand over in a little while to Emma Bernstein from Sport England, who's just going to set some context and talk about the importance of the community survey, and also make reference to place and how the community survey is going to fit in with some of the new place initiatives that Sport England have. And then the main section of today is myself covering the key numbers and findings from the community surveys that we've carried out over the last 2 years, really. So I'll take about 15 minutes flying through those. I'm then going to hand over to my esteemed colleague, Simon Shibley from Sheffield Hallam Sports Industry Research Centre. Simon's going to be doing some of his deeper dive thinking, as we like to call it, and also how we're now starting to link different data sets and come up with some really interesting insights. Just to finish off with and tidy things up, I'll explain how, if anyone's interested in taking part in the Moving Communities community survey, they can do so. And then at the end, we've allowed at least 10 minutes, maybe a little bit more, for any Q&As that come in via the chat. So hopefully everyone's in the right place, right time. You're expecting us to talk about the Moving Communities community survey. So I hand over to you just to give us a little bit of Sport England context about things.
Yeah, thanks, Mike, and good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us on what's a really important webinar, updating you on the developments across Moving Communities, and particularly focusing in on a key element of the service, which is the community survey. What I just wanted to do is give a little bit of context and then hand over for some of the detail to Sheffield Hallam University, an important partner who work with us on the consortium of suppliers who deliver Moving Communities. So I won't dwell too much on it, but I think it's important just to let you know where we've got to on the development of the scheme in its totality, as Mike said, its role in place and how it continues to support the facilities part of our sector. So Moving Communities, for those of you who know, it's been around for about 4 years now, a little bit longer, and we've just recommitted as Sport England to supporting it free of charge to local authorities, active partnerships, community partners and leisure operators for another 4 years. So we really see the value in understanding a detailed view of participation and being able to link that with our social value work to understand the real impact of facilities and activities that are happening in local places and spaces. So it's a really key tool. We really value the data, and I know in terms of the work that we've done on the facility side, DCMS also value the platform, and it really helps to add a level of colour and flavour alongside tools like Active Lives and Active Places, which Sport England run, to help us build up this understanding of the importance and the role that physical activity can play in our communities. So that's why we're continuing to support it. as I said, it is free of charge, and we want to continue to make the access to the platform and to many of the services within that free. So we will be doing that and working with our partners and very much wanting to include webinars and case studies and examples of how you use that platform with the different user groups that use the platform. If you just want to flick on, Mike, I'll just explain a little bit about how we've structured the service for the next 4 years, which is slightly different to where we've been, but still keeps the leisure centres as a key focal point. So this diagram, and I'll just give you an overview, that I'm sure the slides will be sent, but on the left-hand side shows the different data sources that we try to work with across the Moving Communities service. In the first orange section on the middle left-hand side are the different types of data and the KPIs that we try to collate across that. And then on the right-hand side, as you move across, you can see the different dashboards and filters and the different user groups who use the platform. And I probably just wanted to spend a little bit of time looking at the left-hand side where you've got the different data providers. So I've mentioned before already, we very much were in a leisure centre space in the first 4 years of the Moving Communities contract. That still is true for the next 4, but we want to supplement that now with an understanding of activity that's going on across the place. So working with community programmes, working with health programmes, working with national governing bodies and wider national delivery partners to really pull together a detailed understanding of participation. We want to also, though, put that importantly in the context of the place and providing local area data. Now, that might be national statistics, wider context work that we have at Sport England, giving that local picture, but alongside an important survey with the community, understanding attitudes and perceptions and barriers to the physical activity habits that they might have. So today is going to go into that community survey section of this diagram. There'll be other webinars that we do across the next few months and across that 4-year period that help bring to life some of the other elements. But yeah, really excited to focus in today on that community survey. And I'll stay on the call and happy to answer any questions as we go, Mike, on wider context. But I'll hand back to you to take the next bit.
Lovely. Thanks, Emma. Really important context and exciting to see how the community survey is going to be part of place going forward. So just a little bit of background. Some people will be very aware of this, but let's just remind ourselves what the community survey is and what it's all about. So it's a standardized online survey designed to help engagement with residents regarding their attitudes and perceptions around physical activity and active leisure in their local community. So this is much wider than just leisure centres, sports centres, health clubs, physical facilities. And whereas the customer experience survey is just about your users, obviously very important, this is the survey, this is the data and the insight which looks at the whole community and looks at both indoor and outdoor physical activity opportunities. Now, there's always it's really important, there's a free element to this. So the survey, a standardised survey which we've developed along with Simon at Sheffield Hallam and Sport England's Insight team over many years, can be used, downloaded and used free of charge as long as you're registered with the community, with the Moving Communities service. Benefits of the survey, and we're getting some really good feedback now. We're up to 16 local authorities over the last few years that have done this survey across England. So the benefits of to them of doing the survey are definitely becoming clearer. So number one, it provides insight into what local residents think about physical activity, active leisure, etc., as well as what their views are on opportunities available in their area. Secondly, it's about understanding existing barriers to residents being physically active or more physically active. What can you do to encourage them? Thirdly, providing insight into characteristics between and the difference, I guess, in characteristics between those that choose to use our public sport and leisure facilities and those that don't. And finally, we have some really important key questions there about perceptions of the current sport and leisure facility provision amongst both non-users and users. And I've got a particular point about that I will come to later on. Okay, the survey questions, 6 key areas that are always covered. The first one is a very general one around current levels of physical activity, not just current levels, but also people's attitude towards physical activity. Do they want to be more active? What's stopping them? What would encourage them, etc. We then move on to indoor physical activity, which obviously includes local leisure, sports centre provision, but is wider than that as well. Any sort of community indoor physical activity opportunities covered. Physical activity aspirations, sorry, that should have been covered after the physical activity session. Fourth one, outdoor physical activity, including local outdoor provision, so parks, open spaces, etc. Fifthly, active travel. So there's 3 or 4 key questions around active travel, how active people are and what would encourage them, what are the barriers. And then finally, a fairly small section which focuses on those families, those carers that have responsibility for children under 16. What's their view on physical activities for them as a family? So they're the 6 key areas. Okay, so let's move on to the findings. We're going to share with you today is based on this from a point of view of a sample size. So we're now at 16 local authorities across England, combined total of 7,224 responses. And it's good to note that we now are building up a good cross-section geographically and demographically. Although those of you that have heard us speaking about this before will know that one of the key elements of this survey is that it's weighted. So even though it's weighted, it's important that when we do these surveys within a local authority, we get a good sample and we get as representative sample as possible. Simon will talk a little bit more about this later. But we are now at the stage with 16 local authorities that we've got a good mixture of different sorts of local authorities, whether they be urban, rural, etc. Okay, so let's go into some of the headline findings here. So, for example, a nice easy one to start off with, this is looking around physical activity levels. So what's the percentage of people that are active for at least 30 minutes on 5+ days per week? And according to our stats at the moment, that sits at 30%, 7%. Interesting comparison there with active travel. Number of people that are doing at least 1 day or more of 30 minutes of active travel is much higher at 80%. And then over on the right there, you've got weekly activity level, and you can see a split there between 9% of our sample doing 0 days, 54% are at that 1 to 4 days, and 37% at 5+ days. And when Simon does some drilling down later on, these 3 groups we are terming as being the inactive, the fairly active, and the active. So we're setting quite a high barrier for someone to be designated as active in terms of this survey. They need to be doing 5 or more days a week of 30 minutes of moderate intensity activity. Okay, would people like to be more active? Nice, simple, big picture questions to start off with. And by and large, you know, the vast majority of people say yes, 65%. We have a quarter of people that are saying no, and then the remainder. Sorry, up a bit. And the remainder of the 10% saying they're not sure. Now, one of the key things on this slide is to bear in mind that those people that are saying no, I don't want to be more active, typically 50% of those are saying that because they feel that they're active enough already. So it's a fairly small percentage these days that people who are saying I'm not active and I don't want to be more active. It's, you know, really down at that 10 sort of 12% level now of people that are saying, you know, no, I'm not active enough, but I don't want to be active anymore. So what type of activities would they like to do more of? What would they gravitate towards? And the interesting thing here for me is how strong indoor leisure, physical activity opportunities are still, because there's been, I think it's agreed, there's been a bit of a shift towards people exercising, being physically active, A, outdoors, and B, independently. And that would fall under that second section, and also under active travel, that third column down there. But what we do discover is when we drill down, for example, we split between active, those people that are already active and those people that are fairly active or inactive, we get even more enhanced differences here. And generally speaking, what I say is that the people what I see is that the people who are less active tend to gravitate more towards more structured indoor leisure physical activity opportunities like dance, fitness, gym, swimming, etc. And those people that are already active or fairly active tend to be, perhaps due to confidence or perhaps due to more self-motivation, tend to be more open to doing independent stuff outdoors or indeed active travel. And the other key thing there, I guess, is to look at this sport, informal and non-competitive, 24%, and organised sport, 15%. That can be looked at in two ways. Yes, those figures are considerably less than the indoor and outdoor big type activity things over here. However, what can't be underplayed is how people who tend to do the sport, whether it be non-competitive, informal, organised, tend to adhere to it more than some of the people up here. So it may be smaller in percentage terms, but the value that it adds in terms of overall physical activity across the community can be significant. Okay, which sessions would encourage you to be more active? This is really interesting, I think, when we give people, and this is a list which people select from. And what starts to come through here is this idea that people know and feel that they want support in order to start being physically active. So 55%, number one option, sessions for beginners, 37% sessions for old people, 35% sessions for women and girls. So there's a long list from which people could choose here, but the people that, again, this is focusing on those people that are inactive or fairly inactive. Now, one of the things that they recognize is they want a session that is appropriate to them, because they know if they don't get that support and encouragement, and if they're not exercising with like-minded people, perhaps at similar levels of health and of fitness to them, then they're not going to keep it going. Okay, let's move through local community survey. So this is leisure centre usage in the last 12 months. At the moment, 66% of our total national sample have used the leisure centre usage in the last 12 months. Now, the reason we ask this question is not so much to find out what this figure is nationally, because there are better sources for that from Sport England, from data, from Moving Communities and data collection itself. But this is important because this shows to me that when we are doing these surveys, we are still probably getting too many people completing the survey who are regular or irregular users of leisure centres. So we need to try and bring down that figure, because at the moment, too many active users of leisure centres are completing the survey, and it's overrepresenting them in our survey sample. And then we have this question around local leisure centre rating. And the interesting question, this figure here of 54%, is the percentage of people that are currently using leisure centres that score very good or good on this on the 4-point scale that we have. One of the interesting questions, in fact, I'd like to put that out. So this question, those people have a think about this. If you were going to get this score for your local authority, public sector leisure provision, would you be interested, or would you be more interested in that score being just from your users, or would it be more important for you to have a score that is from the whole community, regardless of whether people choose to use it or not? If anyone's got any views on that, I'd welcome those in the chat box, because it's an internal debate that we're having at the moment. At the moment, we can present this figure in both ways. We can say it's just a rating by users, or it's a rating of the whole community, whether they use it or not. Next question, why have you not used the leisure centre in the last 12 months? This is interesting that the number one reason is because they've been doing activity outside of the centre. And then we move on to the more typical ones around cost expense, which typically comes up really highly. And then we have those time-related ones, which are always present, work-related, family-related, And that sort of links, I guess, to that third one, non-availability of activities at a convenient time. So we do have this whole, we have expense, but we also have convenience and time as well that are key issues. Slightly different way of asking this question. What's important when you're choosing a local leisure centre to use? Price affordability, 68%, activities on offer, 65%, location, which links to convenience and ease of use of access, membership offers and parking. Some barriers and encouragement factors, top 5 barriers to using a leisure centre. See that summarised there. Top 3 offers most likely to encourage the use: discounted prices, no obligation free taster sessions, and exclusive sessions. So that sort of builds on that earlier question where we were talking about beginner sessions being one of the key routes in for people. But let's move out to outdoors, literally. So what would encourage you to use the outdoors more to exercise? These are becoming quite consistent now when we do this survey. So reducing crime and antisocial behaviour, 43%, improved lighting, more information about activities available outdoors, improving access and footpaths, etc., etc. What would encourage you to active travel more? Much more specific stuff here. Walkers and cyclists separate from traffic, 42%, improved safety features, 36%. So this is really interesting. We're building up a national picture, but obviously when local authorities or their operators get their own specific report, there is a significant differences that we see between local authorities, depending on how good they are or how poor or weak they are at certain things. So always interesting to see the national picture, even more interesting, I think, to see local. Hey, Simon, I think you are there. I can't see you on my screen, but happy to hand over to you now for some deeper dives.
Yeah, I'm here, Mike. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Simon. Over to you, mate.
Brilliant. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Always a great pleasure to contribute to a Moving Communities webinar. And what I want to do is to have a look at the survey and what we can do with it. So the first thing is the power of cross-tabulations. And I put cross-tabulations in inverted commas because we academics can get carried away with ourselves and use technical jargon. But basically, crosstabs are about how you cut the data. So we might know, for example, that 37% are active in our communities. But what we might want to know is, well, how does that differ by gender, by age, by ethnic origin, by disability, or indeed whether or not people are active or inactive. And let me give you a point of contrast here and encourage people who do this survey to do it and to get a really good response rate. Every local authority in England is included within the Active Lives survey, and for the most part, the sample size is around about 500. So if you want to split it by gender, it's roughly 51% women, 49% men, and that would give you around about 250 of each. But if we're doing a community survey, if we can get a bigger sample, say pushing 1,000, it enables us to dig deeper into the data and glean more insights. And I want to show you some of those a bit later on. The second thing in inverted commas is latent demand. And I think what Sport England strategy is all about is reducing inactivity as much as encouraging activity. And so what we need to know is who's active and who is inactive. But of those, who would like to do more? So those who are already active and those whose participation we can measure in the Active Lives survey, we call that express demand. But the real philosopher's stone, the golden fleece, whatever cliche you want to use, for sport and physical activity is tapping latent demand. So latent demand is the demand which is hidden and which requires us either to remove barriers or provide encouragement in order for that desire, attitudinal state, to transform into actual behavioral change. And that leads us very nicely onto the third thing in inverted commas, the COM-B approach. So COM-B is a form of behavioral psychology technique, and it's included in the Active Life survey, it's included in the community survey, where the COM stands for capability. Do people have the capability? So what we mean by that is the resources in terms of money and equipment, or the skills in terms of the ability to do sport. So that's the C, the capability. The O, now I've cocked this one up. Capability is to do with, are you physically able to do sport or physical activity? Opportunity is the resources and skills, and motivation, do you want to do it? And the combination of capability, opportunity, and motivation leads to the B, the change in behavior. And that's what we're trying to do, to move people who are inactive to become at least fairly active, and to move people who are fairly active to become fully active. Next up, another way of looking at the Holy Grail is market development versus market penetration. The quick win, and it's something that we have been very successful at in this business, is market penetration. And what I mean by that is enabling already sporty people or already active people to be more sporty or more active. The really hard yards is market development, and that is getting new customers for existing products. And finally, I want to show you how we're going to use some of this to make insight-informed actions. So Mike, or whoever's driving, if you could click on. Brilliant. So what we have now is these are the results of one local authority from which there was a really good response rate that enabled us to cut the data in a particular way. So we've got those people who are less active, which is 66% of this community, versus those people who are active, 34%. And here's the first key bit of insight. Those who are less active, 66%, or almost 2/3 of all respondents, say 81% of them say, yes, I would like to be more active than I am now. And that enables us to compute the size of that market. So 81% of 66% gives you 54%. Half of the population who are less active want to be more active. By contrast, those who are active, 34%, just over half of them, 56%, say they want to be more active. 34% times 56% gives you 19%. So you've got 2.8 many times less active people who say they want to be active than you have active people who say they want to be even more active. And the key point here, I suppose, is that you need to have different strokes for different folks. If I wanted to get a gym user to use the gym more frequently, I could say to them, instead of coming once a week, if in January you came 5 times rather than 4 times, and I gave you a water bottle or a towel in return for your extra attendance, the chances are they would accept that deal. If I said to somebody who was inactive, if you go to the gym 5 times in January, I'll give you a water bottle or a towel, they would probably say to me something that ended in off. And so you have to realize that the less active people need a different approach. And one of the things I'm going to show you shortly is how that different approach might be implemented. So if we could click on to the next one, please. This is the COM-B model that I cocked up in my introduction. So the first 2 bars, I have the necessary resources to be active. I have the necessary sporting skills. They are the opportunity side of things. And if we look at the less active v the active, we can see that there is a noticeable variation. The less active, 67% say they have the resources. Conveniently enough, 67% say that they have the necessary sporting skills. But for those who are active, you've got scores in the 80s. By contrast, when we look at the capability, we look 99% versus 100. And when we look at the motivation, 98 versus 100, there isn't much difference. So if we're going to apply this model, the COM-B approach to behavior change, then where the greatest gains are to be had is in opportunity. 67% for necessary resources and necessary sporting skills. So hold that thought and let's move on to the next slide, please. And what we're looking at here is, from the community survey, a comparison or a cross-tabulation of those who are active versus those who are less active, and asking them, what would you like to do more of? So let's not get confused between absolute and relative. In absolute terms, indoor leisure is by far the thing they would most like to do more of, followed by outdoor leisure, followed by travel. So that's how it is in absolute terms. In relative terms, what we're interested in is the difference between the less active and the active. And you can see on the top bar on indoor leisure, those people who are less active have a noticeably higher score than those who are active. So we could be pushing on an open door here in terms of using our public leisure centres to encourage people who are currently inactive or less active to become more physically active. Mike is a bit more, I don't know, enthusiastic or upbeat about the scores for sport and organised sport, but you can see that in absolute terms, they are relatively low in comparison to the other types of physical activity. And you can also see that they are relatively more attractive to those people who are already active rather than those who are less active. Personally, I find this a bit difficult, having spent the thick end of 40 years working in sport, to see figures like this. But to be consistent with the Sport England strategy, which is about getting people physically active, we need to be looking at those things which are going to have the most significant impact, and they are likely to be the informal lifestyle safe activities like dance, fitness, going to the gym, swimming, and less likely to be how I misspent my youth playing rugby and cricket and competitive organised sport. So we can take another look at that if we move on to the next slide. And this is where we're looking at the comparison between active and less active and what would encourage them to use leisure centres. So in absolute terms, the one figure that stands out is the second one from the bottom. For active people, none of the above. And in a way, that's quite a good thing, because it enables us to focus our resource on those who do want to be more active and the things that they do want to do. So next up is discounted prices. But it's a little bit more subtle than that. So if you give me a click, we should get a highlight coming up. Second up is no obligation free taster sessions. And I have to say, this one did take me by surprise. I would have thought that this would have been of great appeal to the less active people, but you can see that the score for active people is almost twice as much as it is for those who are less active. So let's see where there's a differential that works in our favor. So probably need a double click to clear that one and bring the next one up. There we go. So we can see at the top, discounted prices work for both groups, but exclusive sessions for specific groups, e.g. elderly, disabled, LGBTQ+, we see a very significant variation. And what I want to do with that is to link it back to the responses we saw in the COM-B questions. For the most part, capability is there, motivation is there, but opportunity isn't. And so exclusive sessions for specific groups deals with the specific opportunity of, I haven't got the necessary skills, which were significantly lower for those people who were less active. If we clear that box and move on to the next one. Here we can see that although at the top we had discounted prices for general reasons, amongst the less active, discounted prices for specific disadvantaged reasons, such as being a student, having a disability, being a single parent or unemployed, would be something which less active people value relatively higher than those who are already active. Click on again. So finally, from me, what else can we do with data? Well, the first thing is linking to other data sets. And I want to give you an example here. On the community survey, we collect people's postcode. And we don't do that because we're nosy or we want to bombard them with sales material. The reason for doing it is that if we have someone's postcode, we can put it into an index of multiple deprivation converter, which will give us some kind of estimate as to the decile, so the 10th level of deprivation that people fall into. And just a quick story on this, we used this last summer. Rotherham Council put on a concert in Clifton Park by a band called the Raytons, who are a Rotherham band. And we surveyed about 900 people. Most of them gave us their postcodes. And when we entered up the data, we ran the postcodes through an IMD converter to get the profiles. And what it showed was that people from the 2 lowest deciles were significantly overrepresented in the audience. Now in sport, we struggle to get the most deprived people, but in arts and cultural activities, the divide is even greater. So we did this massive economic impact study, but the one thing that really wet Rotherham Council's whistle was the fact that they had reached so many people from relatively deprived communities. As a logical extension of that, people from deprived areas is one form of equality, diversity, and inclusion monitoring, but you can do it in other ways. You do have other target groups. So women and girls, children and young people, people with a disability, the list goes on. But by having this data, it enables us to analyze these subgroups, particularly if we've got a big sample, and particularly if the sampling has been done robustly, to really dig deep and get a much better sense of what's going on in our community than we would do, say, through the Active Lives survey. As a penultimate point, I would like to encourage you to consider investing in the community survey as an investment rather than an expense. And I say this because if you do it once now, we get a baseline. And if you do it in 18 months or 2 years' time, we then get a T+1. So we can compare how we have done or how we're doing now compared with how we did previously. And that's called internal benchmarking. But also we have the opportunity of external benchmarking, which is comparing ourselves with other authorities, which is something that can be done on the Moving Communities platform on the dashboard, whereby it is possible to compare your figures with other authorities. And the final point from me before I shut up is that the whole point of this is to make a positive difference, that activity and inactivity levels have been stubbornly static. We've recovered to pre-COVID levels, but we're not moving particularly well in the right direction. And so it is possible to learn from and with peers, similar to how we did in the days of the National Benchmarking Service, whereby we would identify the best performing facilities on certain indicators, make these public, and then enable other people who wanted to learn from the best performers, what are they doing differently so that I might improve practice at my own site. And that for me is the end game. The whole point of this is that we as a consortium working in moving communities work with you and help to make some kind of positive difference. And on that happy note and rallying call, I'm going to shut up and move on. Thank you.
Simon, can you just leave your mic on for a second? Thanks for that, bringing some those figures to life and explaining some of the nuances. Just one comment and a quick question for you, just to keep you on your toes in your later years, Simon. Really interesting. I thought it was okay for the being physically capable wasn't a challenge to the inactive. I thought that was really interesting. But my question to you is, we're really bringing out the differences that that people are trying to promote physical activity need to understand between the active and the inactive. If you were in charge of UK or English health, where is the best return on investment? Is it on getting people who are totally inactive slightly more active 1 or 2 days, or is it on getting those people that are already doing 2, 3, 4 days a week to get up to that 5 times 30 level?
The best bang for your buck, and I think all of the health data would support this, is getting people from 0 to hero, or 0 to doing something. So if you look at the way Sport England measures it, inactive 0 to 29 minutes, that's where you'll get the greatest return. The next greatest return would be those who do 30 minutes to 149 minutes. They're getting some kind of benefit, but not the full benefit. But once you start working with those people who are doing 150 minutes or more, effectively, you're preaching to the converted. And the real task is the missionary work of getting those people who are, if I can continue the analogy, non-believers in physical activity, doing something or doing more, rather than, someone like you, Mike, is probably doing about 5 or 6 hours a week anyway, doing 7 hours a week.
You're being a little bit optimistic about my activity levels at the moment, Simon, but I appreciate your faith in me. Thanks for that. Really appreciate that, and some really interesting facts there. Please, Jack, can you be ready just to keep an eye on any questions coming up in the chat? I think there's a couple there that are definitely worth addressing. While you're doing that, and please, any comments or questions, add them to the chat now. We've got 10 minutes to answer between myself and Simon and Emma. Just to explain the different ways to take part to use the survey. First of all, as I mentioned, there is a freemium service which all local authorities and operators in England can use just by accessing the Moving Communities platform. The online survey and a set of basic results are then available and presented back to you on the platform, and you'll get some basic hand-holding and assistance from myself and Simon's team about how to implement that survey locally, which in essence is promoting it out as best you can to the wider community. However, we do have this premium service. The 16 local authorities that are included in this sample have all people that have taken part in the premium service. There's a charge for an additional fee. You get the enhanced service, which includes, and this is the key thing, the weighting of the survey results. We haven't gone into as much detail about how the weighting works and why we do it at this session, but it is a really important element of this survey. It takes an online self-selection survey where we're going to have imbalances between gender, age, etc., and it tries to smooth and iron those out as much as we possibly can, and that allows us to do a good survey and get good results, subject to total sample numbers and it's still being reasonably represented in the local community at a minimal cost, really. And in the premium service, you also get the ability to benchmark the results against the weighted national benchmarks, which is what we've been using today. They're all weighted by age and gender to make them more representative of the country as a whole. And you get the ability to add 3 local questions as well, which we obviously don't report in the webinar because they're very specific to what local authorities and their operators may be looking at any one time. So generally, just enhanced support and guidance to implement that survey successfully. And very quickly, the survey process, it can be done in about 3 or 4 months. The key, I always say at the kickoff meeting, is to have a really successful communication strategy to reach all parts of your community. And that usually involves working quite deeply with the council Marcoms team, because they've got the ability to reach parts of the community that perhaps the sports, leisure, and physical activity people don't. So working through housing, libraries, social services, etc., if they're part of your council, are all key to making sure that we get as many people as possible. The total sample is important, but as I keep saying, if one of the things we really having to do is help people focus on younger men and less active, because these are the groups which we're struggling to get to complete the survey. There's always generally older people and females that seem to be much keener on completing these online surveys. But we now have some really good examples of good practice, what works, what doesn't work. For example, Dave up in the Wirral had some incredible outreach work going out into some of his more harder to reach communities with tablets and getting people to complete the survey literally on their doorsteps and in their local play areas and parks. As I said, you can do the 3 local questions and then you get a dedicated, bespoke report where all your results are weighted to compare to the national benchmark. Okay, so that's the pitch over. Jack, are you there? Have we got any questions that myself, Simon or Emma can handle?
Yeah, absolutely, Mike, if you can hear me. Yeah, we've got some chat coming through after you and Dave were having a conversation amongst yourselves on the chat at the beginning, but no, it's good to stimulate it. I think the first question that came through was around when did the survey take part, and do you think indoor leisure is more popular based on the season in which people took the survey? Maybe you can answer that one, Mike. But Sharping has answered it, which has got a thumbs up, but maybe give you a on that.
Yeah, I did see that one come in, and the only thing I would make a comment on is that the 16 survey, so most of the figures we talked about today were based on the national benchmarks from the 16 surveys, and they were most definitely done throughout the whole year. So there's a good spread. So we don't do all of them in spring or winter or summer. We do generally avoid summer holidays. But we have had surveys that have been completed in May and June and even going into July. I did wonder whether that question related to the crosstabs that Simon was talking to about comparing the inactive and the active, that because that was one survey, I'm not sure. We'd have to go back and check whether that one example that we used, what time of the year that was carried out, because that may affect the whole indoor-outdoor balance. There is, I think we had to prove it, it's fair to say, Simon, but I would suspect there would be a slight differences in people's opinion about outdoor leisure if you surveyed them during spring or summer compared to winter. Would you agree?
I would agree, and I think that's one of the reasons why surveys like Active Lives are so good, is that they do what we call continuous surveying throughout the year to iron out those kind of seasonal fluctuations. And, it's an unfortunate compromise that when doing the community survey, it would be unusual to keep the whole thing open for a year to iron those out. So inevitably there will be a seasonal element that comes into things.
Great, thanks both. Okay, the next question from Amanda was, are you able to share which authorities and areas that have completed the survey? And interestingly, does area influence the responses?
I think we'd be, I can't see why we can't. I won't do it now, but if you'd like to drop me a message and in the chat box, just let me have your email. I don't think there's an issue about listing the 16 authorities that the sample is based, unless you're about to strike me down on that one, Simon. I think we're okay to share who's done it. And then you will be able to see the sort of geographically how it's spread across England. What we haven't done yet, which we used to do in quite a lot of detail with the old National Benchmarking Service, was starting to look at regional or typology type differences between centres, because the old NBS service used to be based on leisure sports centres, not local authorities, that were in predominantly rural or urban or in mixed environments. And we haven't done that as of yet with this. I don't know if you've got anything else to add to that, Simon.
Not really. I think that, yes, we can share the names of the authorities that have signed up for the service. I'd probably be loath to share their results, but I think that in the spirit of partnership working, if we approached on behalf of other interested parties, there might be a willingness to share, but it's not something that we can do by default. The second part of the question was to do with area. And yes, of course, the area does have a very significant bearing. So if you were to contrast, for example, an area in Norfolk by the sea with an urban area, you would find that the seaside towns tend to have older, less ethnically diverse populations, whereas in the urban areas you would get typically younger and more diverse respondents. And in turn, both of those groups would have different tastes and preferences as to what they want to do in terms of their activity and indeed their activity levels. So, good question.
All right, on activity levels, nice segue. Emily's asked a question around how we determine activity levels and how do we determine whether someone's active or not in the survey results. Maybe Simon, that's one for you again.
Yeah, I'll do that one because there is some confusion between the figures that you get from this and the figures that you get from Active Lives. So the Active Lives survey makes 3 distinctions between those who are inactive, 0 to 29 minutes, fairly active, 30 to 149 minutes, and active in the sense of meeting the Chief Medical Officer's prescription of 150 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity per week. Crucially, those times can be built up in blocks of 10 minutes per day. By contrast, what we use on the community survey, because it's measuring lots of things and not just participation rates, is called the SIM, the single item measurement. And that asks on how many days people have done 30 minutes or more moderate intensity physical activity. So by implication, that has to be 30 minutes continuous rather than made up in blocks of 10. Well, that's how people interpret it. And for that reason, when you use the SIM, you tend to get a lower score than you do when you use the Active Lives methodology, which is a more inclusive approach. Hope that answers the question and wasn't just me navel gazing.
No, I think it did. Maybe leave the mics on as well. There's another question here around survey weighting. So what are the survey weightings based on? Is it population demographics or are there other factors too?
The simple answer to that, Sharping's actually the best person to answer it, but to the best of my knowledge, the weighting is based on gender and age, because gender, it goes 2 or 3 different ways. Age, it goes in bandings, and it relies on there being sufficient sample in place to be able to apply those weights, which is one of the reasons why, Mike was saying we need more representative sample from younger people and less active people and men, because if you don't get enough of those, you can't apply the weights. But the simple answer to the question is it's a combined weighting based on gender and age.
Great. Thank you, Simon. And I think if I've read this right, I think the sort of last one is a nice one maybe to close if there's no more, Mike, and that's sort of when is the next moving community survey set to go live again? You talked to the process, but maybe you want to elaborate on that.
Yeah. So just to make sure people aren't getting confused, because we get confused sometimes, the customer experience survey is one of the leisure centre users. That happens once a year during this window of June every year through to October every year. So we'll just starting to plan that, review the question set, and the usual details will be coming out from Sarah Forster in our team about the customer experience survey window of opportunity. The community survey, on the other hand, can be done any time with that 3-4 month lead in. We try and avoid the summer holidays. So if anyone's interested in finding any more about it, either pop your email address into the chat box. I see there's 1 or 2 there now, or make a note of Sarah's email address, which is on the screen now, and just drop her an email, and we'll send you the basic information pack and the options that you've got between the freemium service and the premium service. So just to stress, the community survey is something that can be actioned at any time. Brilliant. All right, thanks for handling those questions. Excellent timing, 1 minute late. So it just comes to me to thank Jack for handling the questions, Emma for setting the context from Sport England, Simon. Always a pleasure to do joint presentations with you, and always learn something from you every time we do it. So that's absolutely great. We are recording this, so if you'd like to have a copy of the recording to share with your colleagues, again, just drop Sarah a line on that email address. Thanks everyone for your time, and have a great rest of the day.